And next we have Alain Dieckhoff, who is head of the Center for International Studies and Research at Sciences Po in Paris, author of, among others, The Invention of a Nation, Zionism and the Making of Modern Israel, 2006, editor of The Politics of Belonging, 2005, and also most recently Revisiting Nationalism, 2010. Alain?
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of the conference for having me here today and for a very interesting conference as far as what I've noticed in different sessions. So my topic tonight is Jewish diaspora in Israel, a case of long-distance nationalism. To begin with, I will just, in kind of introduction, put forward two things which has to do with the link between diaspora and nationalism. In fact, diasporas, or at least people living outside their homelands, played a very important role in the advent of modern nationalism in the 19th century. The reason for their involvement was very well expressed by Alice Gallner 20 years ago. I just want to summarize his argument. His argument is that when you have a society which is mainly agrarian and which progressively becomes an industrial one, this kind of transition changes, among others, the situation of diasporas. I mean by that, people who don't share the culture which is the culture of the majority of the group. And this change had especially important consequences in empires, because in empires, precisely, I think about here mainly Europe, the Russian Empire, Austrian Empire, and of course the Ottoman Empire. In those empires, with some differences, of course, the diasporas played sometimes a very important role. And this role was, they played precisely this important role because they were a minority. I just come to my mind today, just at the moment, that Hannah Arendt, by the way, stressed also, in fact, in his work on imperialism, when she spoke about Austria, stressing the role that the Jews had in building up the empire in the 19th century. So the idea here is that the minorities which were diasporas in those empires had a specific economic niche as middlemen, but also sometimes in very crucial position. I'm thinking here about, for instance, what happened in the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, the role of translators for in official contacts between the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan, and people from abroad, diplomats from abroad, was always taken by Greeks. Why Greeks? Because precisely they were a minority, and the Sultan thought, and rightly so, that they were much more loyal at the end of the day than the majority, which was Muslim. So this kind of role, sometimes very crucial, as I just mentioned, gave diasporas a very important role in empires. But it is precisely this position which is challenged with the advent of the nation state. And precisely because the advent of the nation state is, to go on with the reference to Gallner, trying to give to every culture a political roof, in that context, the situation of diaspora becomes a very difficult position. because they lose progressively the role they had as people between peoples, in fact. And at the end of the day, they have no choice but to build a state for their own people. And just in the Ottoman Empire, this was, of course, the case for the Greeks, the Armenians, and later on for the Jews. Lord Acton, who was professor of history at Cambridge and was also a liberal Catholic, wrote in the 19th century, "Exile is the nursery of nationality." Meaning by that people become nationalist leaders when they live for long periods outside their homeland, outside their patria, if I may say. Like, for instance, Di Valera, the leader of Sinn Féin, who was born in New York, or Mazzini and Garibaldi, who had a very important role, of course, in the Risorgimento in Italy, but were also for a long time in France and Switzerland. But it was precisely those people, because they were outsiders, that were more akin of what it was to belong and not to belong. And it is precisely because they were outside that they were able to really think about what it means to belong. And I think this is an important point, because people who are in the society in an everyday manner, if I may say, they don't reflect about the fact that they belong. They just are there. In a way, you have to be outside to understand what it means to belong. So this is my first introductory point. The second one, and I come here slowly to long-distance nationalism, has to do with what some people call the digital revolution in the last 20 years. I mean by that, not only digital revolution, but I mean the global changes in world society and the growing globalization in the 90s. In that context, some have argued that the relation between diasporas and the national project has qualitatively changed, leading to what Benedict Anderson called long-distance nationalism. So what is long-distance nationalism? For Anderson, and he spoke about that, he wrote about that 15 years ago, is the following. As the result, I quote, as the result of the ethnicization of political life in the wealthy post-industrial states, appears what one can call long-distance nationalism. This type of politics pries open the classical nation-state project from a different directions. And then he goes on and gives some examples of what for him is long-distance nationalism. Among those examples is, for instance, the role of Hindus who are not living in India and who have sponsored the BJP so the nationalist Indian party in India, and even some groups which are more on extreme. The example of Sikh people also in Canada, and I mean Sikh, not people who are not well, but Sikh, the people with a turban. The Sikh people who in Canada or in the UK are fighting for Khalistan, for an independent Sikh state in Punjab, and so on. So this is the idea. I think you got already the idea, or you knew already about that. In fact, I would like to stress what Anderson think are two main features of long-distance nationalism. One first feature is its unaccountability, meaning by that the fact that many, and I quote what he wrote in this article, many of the most uncompromising fanatical adherents of independent Khalistan do not live in the Punjab, but have prosperous businesses in Melbourne and Chicago, end of quote. So the idea here is that when you live in a free democratic country outside the motherland, you can, in a way, take the luxury of extreme position, because you know that you don't feel anything in your homeland when it's a democratic country, and precisely because of this position, you are in a way pushed, or at least you are you have more probability that you end up taking intense political radical positions. So this is one feature for long-distance nationalists, according to Anderson. The other one is the instrumental function of nationalism, long-distance nationalism, which strengthened ethnic identity in the diaspora. So asserting nationalism from far away is a way to defend an embattled ethnic identity. So these are, in a nutshell, the two main features of long-distance nationalism for Anderson. At first sight, I would say that there is, again, a grain of truth in those statements. If I just mention one case here, is the case of the Tamil diaspora. Tamil diaspora is about 500,000 people in Canada, in the UK, USA, Germany, and Switzerland, and Australia. I'm not speaking about the diaspora, or so-called diaspora, which is in the southern part of India. I'm just speaking about people who are not in the subcontinent. So 500,000 people, and it's true that this diaspora has supported heavily the liberation targets of Tamil Eelam, which was both politically and financially, till they were defeated in May 2009. Just to give you one figure, between 2002 and 2005, it is estimated that 8 million euros were sent every year from Canada alone to the LTTE. So it's not something which is marginal. One scholar a specialist, an expert on Tamil in Sri Lanka, wrote, and I quote, "The Sri Lankan Tamil diaspora has been a crucial component of the lethality and tenacity of the conflict. The huge expansion and increasing affordability of information technologies that began in the 90s greatly enhanced the ability of the insurgents to exploit the resource available in the diaspora." End of quote. So this seems to give credit to this argument. What I would like to do in the main time allotted to my speech is to test the hypothesis of Anderson in the case of the contemporary Jewish diaspora. To begin with, modern Jewish nationalism in the plural, were a product of the diaspora. And in fact, it could not be otherwise. As a matter of fact, because Jews were, as a people, almost all in the diaspora at the end of the 19th century. Why do I speak about nationalism in plural concerning the Jews? Because this is, of course, very specific to the situation. There were various kinds of nationalism among the Jews in the 19th century. One was what we could call diaspora nationalism. Jews who wanted to fight and fought, in fact, where they stayed, for instance in Russia, and wanted to fight for a democratic and socialist Russia, claiming just cultural autonomy for them, but on the spot, without migration. There were, okay, I haven't time to dwell into the details of this developments. The other kind of nationalism, Jewish nationalism, was of course the one who was successful, which is Zionism. And Zionism aspired to build a state in Palestine with the migration of the Jews from the diaspora to Palestine. So Zionism was, in that way, a unique diaspora nationalism, different from other diaspora nationalism, because for the only reason that, in comparison, for instance, with the Greeks, it's true that the Greek diaspora played an important role in modern Greek nationalism, but the core Greek people was in mainland Greece and in the island. Of course, in the case of the Jews, it wasn't the case at all, because only 1% of the world Jewish population at the time was settled in Palestine. The situation changed, the situation of the Jews changed dramatically in the second half of the 20th century, and within the Jewish world, Zionism became able to garner more and more support after the Holocaust and afterwards in the wake of the Six-Day War in 1967. And we can say, I have to go a little fast through all those developments, but we can say that the symbolic centrality of the State of Israel for modern Jewry has clearly deepened over the last 65 years. However, and this is precisely what I would like to demonstrate, does this mean that the Jewish diaspora is mainly leaning towards intense political radicalism, to take up, of course, Anderson's position? I will show that it is not the case. To begin with, concerning diaspora and politics, we should be clear about what we are speaking about. It is true that Jewish organizations abroad, the American Jewish Congress or American Jewish Committee in the US, or umbrella organization like here in the UK, the Board of Deputies of British Jews, are in a way legitimist. I mean by that they support the State of Israel and their government, and the government of Israel, which is in charge of the country. So they defend, by principle, I would say, Israeli policy, and are reluctant to publicly criticize Israel. But does this LDN, long-distance nationalism, translate into a uniform radical political stand? The answer is no, and I will precisely show that, in fact, the reverse is the fact. Of course, it is well known that in the US, especially, there is a very powerful Jewish lobby, the AIPAC, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee, which is, I would say, clearly leaning towards the right in Israel and supporting Netanyahu and this kind of policy. But I would rather try to emphasize the reverse, I mean, which is, I think, less known in the general public. What is less known is, in fact, that when you look closely what is going on within the Jewish diaspora, and I will mainly speak about the US here, because it is also here that I found much more data than in other places, we see that, in fact, the American Jews built a lot of very different organizations which supported, I would say, a soft nationalism in Israel, and not at all a hardline nationalism. To give you just some examples here, liberal Jewish Americans supported the Israeli peace movement, Peace Now. They were involved in back-channel negotiation with the PLO, and they were even among the first to meet with the former chairman of the PLO, Yasser Arafat, in 1988 in Stockholm. They created also the New Israel Fund in 1980, which is a fund which channels money for various organizations in Israel. And when you look at what kind of organizations are supported by this fund, you see that they support mainly organizations, and I would say only organizations, who defend in many ways pluralism within Israel. Religious pluralism, women's rights, equality between Jews and Arabs, and so on. So not at all right-wing, of course, agendas at all. They finally even set up, as some of you may know, a lobby in Washington, in the strict sense of the word, a political action committee, which is active with Congress, whose name is J Street, which was created in 2008. And it's interesting to see what is on the agenda of this lobby, which is working in Israel and in Washington, sorry, and in a way is trying to act and to diminish the role of AIPAC on the other side, which is the other Jewish lobby, as I said. The main ideas defended by J Street are the following: commitment to and support for the people and the state of Israel. So this seems quite natural, and they state here that the Jewish people has a right to a national home, and also a national home which should be based on democratic principles. Secondly, is very important here is that the future of Israel depends on achieving a two-state solution. So this means clearly that they think that the Palestinians must have a national home of their own, living side by side with Israel, which is not clearly a radical nationalist stand, or the reverse. And they stress also, and I think this is very important when you look how it works, they stress also the fact that Israel supporters in the diaspora have not only the right, but the obligation to speak out when they think the policies or actions of the Israeli government are hurting Israel's and the Jewish people long-term interests. So we may say that there is not only a right, there is a duty to dissent. A duty to dissent in the diaspora if some Jews are not thinking that the Israeli government is going in the right direction. So the outcome of this statement, by the way, is that the J Street helped financially candidates for the Congress with real success. I must say, I just looked at the figures for the last elections in Congress in 2012, November 2012. AIPAC backed 71 congressmen, and 71 in the election. So, I mean, this is a figure which seems quite encouraging for J Street today. So, to sum up here, the argument is clearly, and I think I was able to show that, is clearly to see that on this point, it is clear that the diaspora outside Israel is not leaning towards the right, but rather the reverse, and this is mainly, I showed this mainly through the American case. I would even say that right radicalism is in many ways much more stronger in Israel than it is in the diaspora. Which doesn't mean that you won't find in the diaspora something which goes in direction of what Anderson wanted to stress. Yes, you found also this idea of an accountability. And it's true that some people in the diaspora support political radicalism, and some, like the millionaire Irving Moskowitz in the US, which is giving generous money to the settlers in East Jerusalem. So you will find these kind of figures. But this should not be taken as the whole and overall picture of what's happening in American Jewry especially. The second point, which I want to look at, is the question of which Anderson raised also, the instrumental function for strengthening ethnic identity in the diaspora. Is nationalism, in a way to defend an embattled ethnic identity? So this has to do with, of course, ethnicity. As I said, and this is well known in the US especially, identification with Israel and support reached its peak after the 1967 war, and we can clearly say that support for Israel is a kind of religion, if I may say, for American Jews, and that even the most liberal, and I'm thinking denomination like the Reform movement, stressed on its platform at the 1997 that, and I quote, the renewal and perpetuation of Jewish national life in the land of Israel is a necessary condition for the realization of the physical and spiritual redemption of the Jewish people and of all humanity. End of quote. So this is one thing, and the surveys, and in the US we have several surveys on the topic, which is quite useful for a political scientist. To the statement, for instance, to the question, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? Caring about Israel is a very important part of my being Jew. 79% said yes, it is important for my life. So it is clear that it is part of the identity of the Jews in the US. But if we go beyond the general statement, how can we assess the role of long-distance nationalism as a way of strengthening Jewish identity? And here come, I think, very interesting findings. The findings are the following. The first one, and it is an important point, there is a decline in the importance of Israel for American Jews. When you look at two indicators, one is the question of donation financial donation to Israel. It dropped very sharply in the last 30 years. Another kind of indicator is the question of tourism in Israel. And here you find that although 81% of Orthodox Jews visited Israel, only 38% of Reform Jews went to Israel. And when you look more closely at the results, there was a survey which was done in 2012. The question was, have you ever been to Israel? 59% said no. And the following question was, why not? And the question was 48%, I have never had the opportunity to go, and 31%, I am not interested. So this is interesting. This is interesting because it's a kind of, on the one side you have a kind of general commitment to, yes, Israel is important in my life, but when you look at the details, in fact, it doesn't matter really. So it is part of a kind of imaginary community, to go back to Anderson, but it has no practical effect, and this I found also very interesting. One of the other interesting thing you see also when you look closely at those different surveys is that what I thought at the beginning, my assessment, my kind of hypothesis, in fact, was that long-distance nationalism, involvement in Israel affairs, could be a kind of ethnic marker for non-religious Jews. In fact, when you look at the data, you find that this hypothesis is not validated. It's not true. In fact, Israel plays a role, but it plays a role to reinforce already existing connection, and those connections are mainly religious. I mean by that institutionally affiliated Jews who in the US are going to the synagogues, are in the communal centers and so on, are closer to Israel than Jews who are not organization members. So there is a kind of cumulative move. When you are religious, you're also much more involved in Israel. You go there, you go even for tourism, you go there, you have strong connection. If you're not religious, you just don't go, or on a much more narrow percentage than the other one. And I think this is interesting. This shows that at least LDN, long distance nationalism, does not work as a kind of substitute for religion in its sense. It is something which goes with religion, but not with something which is we can replace, in fact, religions. I'm coming slowly to my conclusion. My conclusion here is clearly that when you look at this at the Jewish case, that the Anderson's assumptions are not confirmed clearly, and on both instances, on the question of an accountability on one, and on the question of reinforcing ethnic identity. Maybe we should, in order to maybe make a difference between two kinds of diaspora. So I'll broaden a little. I broaden my perspective here at the end of my talk. I think that we should maybe make a difference between what my Israeli colleague Gabi Shefer called stateless diaspora and state-oriented diaspora. I think there may be a difference between the kind of political mobilization among those types of diaspora. The idea being that political radicalism is stronger, is in stateless diaspora than it is in state-oriented diaspora. What are stateless diaspora? Stateless diaspora are diasporas like the Kurds, or especially the Tamils, who have not state of their own, who want to have a state of their own. And of course, state-oriented diaspora are diaspora who have already an existing state, like the Jews today, or the Turks, the non-Kurdish Turks, and so on. And I think I'm not able to really demonstrate that I'm right, but my intuition is that because the first one, a stateless diaspora, are committed to have a state of their own, because they aspire to achieve international recognition, and in order to get that, they are more prone to support groups which fight in the homeland for their cause, and they may fight even with violent means. And I think that we have many examples which confirm this assumption. The Kurds in Germany supported the PKK in Turkey, the Sikh, I already mentioned Canada and Britain, supported the Khalistan movement, or the Tamils, of course, supported the LTTE. So I think that it is this kind of structured position of the diaspora which is conducive to a more assertive political radicalism, even if we should not at the same time have a kind of mechanical thinking about that. Because when you look, for instance, and I did that concerning the Tamils, it is clear that it is not only the structural position as a stateless diaspora which plays a role, but also the fact that the diaspora was in a way partly in the hands of people linked with the LTTE, and those people, of course, wanted to mobilize the people of the diaspora to defend their cause, and even raised what they called the revolutionary tax, which was in fact money which the Tamil had to give to defend the cause. So I think that, and these are my last words, political opinions, in my view, are more evenly distributed within state-oriented diasporas, and from that, precisely in the case I just mentioned at length, political opinions in the home state reflect much more the political landscape of the homeland in those diaspora that it does in stateless diaspora, which are maybe more akin with the kind of model which was presented by Benedict Anderson. Thank you very much.
The Association for the Study of Ethnicity and Nationalism is an interdisciplinary student-led research association founded by research students and academics in 1990 at the London School of Economics and Political Science. We seek to fulfill two broad objectives: to facilitate and maintain an interdisciplinary global network of researchers, academics, and other scholars interested in ethnicity and nationalism, and to stimulate, produce, and diffuse world-class research on ethnicity and nationalism. We do this through our global membership, our two leading journals, Nations and Nationalism and Studies in Ethnicity and Nationalism, our newsletter, The Ruritanian, which provides key updates on information in the field, and through our programme of events. Our YouTube channel features videos from our annual conferences, seminar series, lectures and debates. You can find us online at lse.ac.uk/ASEN, on Twitter at ASEN Events, or on Facebook at facebook.com/ASEN Events.
Hannah Arendt, by the way, stressed also, in fact, in his work on imperialism, when she spoke about Austria, stressing the role that the Jews had in building up the empire in the 19th century. So the idea here is that the minorities which were diasporas in those empires had a specific economic niche as middlemen, but also sometimes in very crucial position. I'm thinking here about, for instance, what happened in the Ottoman Empire. In the Ottoman Empire, the role of translators for in official contacts between the Ottoman Empire, the Sultan, and people from abroad, diplomats from abroad, was always taken by Greeks. Why Greeks? Because precisely they were a minority, and the Sultan thought, and rightly so, progressively becomes an industrial one. This kind of transition changes, among others, the situation of diasporas. I mean by that, people who don't share the culture which is the culture of the majority of the group. And this change had especially important consequences in empires, because in empires, precisely, I think about here mainly Europe, the Russian Empire, Austrian Empire, and of course the Ottoman Empire. In those empires, with some differences, of course, the diasporas played sometimes a very important role. And this role was, they played precisely this important role because they were a minority. I just come to my mind today, just at the moment, that
and next we have Alain Dieckhoff, who is head of the Center for International Studies and Research at Sciences Po in Paris, author of, among others, The Invention of a Nation, Zionism and the Making of Modern Israel, 2006, editor of The Politics of Belonging, 2005, and also most recently Revisiting Nationalism, 2010. Alain?
First of all, I would like to thank the organizer of the conference for having me here today and for a very interesting conference as far as what I've noticed in different sessions. So my topic tonight is Jewish diaspora in Israel, the case of long-distance nationalism. To begin with, I will just, in kind of introduction, put forward two things which has to do with the link between diaspora and nationalism. In fact, diasporas, or at least people living outside their homelands, played a very important role in the advent of modern nationalism in the 19th century. The reason for their involvement was very well expressed by Alain Dieckhoff 20 years ago. I just want to summarize his argument. His argument is that when you have a society which is mainly agrarian, and which that they were much more loyal at the end of the day than the majority, which was Muslim. So this kind of role, sometimes very crucial, as I just mentioned, gave diasporas a very important role in empires. But it is precisely this position which is challenged with the advent of the nation state. And precisely because the advent of the nation state is, to go on with the reference to Gellner, trying to give to every culture a political roof, in that context, the situation of diaspora becomes a very difficult position. Because they lose progressively the role they had as people between peoples, in fact, and at the end of the day, they have no choice but to build a state for their own people. And